Aloha, and welcome back to the fourth episode of Talk Story with House Majority. My name is Della Belatti, and I serve as the House Majority Leader for the state of Hawaii's 30th Legislature. This weekly webcast is comprised of conversations with state executives, community and business leaders, and my Democratic colleagues in the House of Representatives. I'm very excited about this episode today. We are in week 10 of the state's stay-at-home orders, and the legislature just finished a 2-week session. The theme of this week's episode is leadership in the time of crisis and consensus building. I have two very special guests with me today. First off, I will be joined by Governor David Ige, who is at the forefront of our state's response in these times of uncertainty. Later, I will be speaking with Speaker of the House, Scott Saiki, about this behind-the-scenes work of dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. Be sure to comment with your questions to our guest in the live stream featured on facebook.com/Olelo Community. So today I have joining me Governor David Ige. Welcome, Governor, to our show today.
Well, thank you so much, Della, for having me on. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and for those watching all across the state of Hawaii.
Thank you so much, Governor. You know, this is a little bit different. We really want to kind of delve a little bit beyond just the highlights that are on our newspapers. Really want this conversation to be about leadership. And so 10, 15 years from now, after we've successfully navigated this pandemic, which I believe we really are going to do together, my first question to you is, what would you like people to say about your leadership?
You know, I think, Della, the most important thing is that we can only be successful as a community. What COVID-19 taught us is that if we are taking independent and disparate kind of actions, we cannot be successful. And I think you've seen it on CNN and all across the country where the governor disagrees with the legislature, disagrees with county mayors, and you can kind of see the uneven actions. And I think of most concern really is the fact that the community suffers. So certainly, I hope that those who study COVID-19 and this pandemic 20 years from now will really look and see that we did come together as a community to fight the battle together, and we were successful because of that.
You know, I think that's something really unique to Hawaii, to our community. I don't want to overshadow or that we don't have difficulties, because I think you've seen that, and I'll be the first to acknowledge the relationship between the legislature, the executive hasn't always been smooth, but I think we always keep coming back to the table, and that's really important. So for me, educating a legislator, when you are confronted with tough decisions as the executive, and it's very clear that others are looking to you to make the final call, what are the conditions, the quality of the information, who are the people that you are looking to that will make you eventually make that ultimate call when it's called upon you to do that?
A couple of things, Della, and obviously for me on the executive side, the cabinet is very important, and I've really looked for leaders in the cabinet and tried to get a balance of different backgrounds and experiences. But I really worked very hard to empower the cabinet members to really do their job, to have the authority. Obviously there are some big decisions that need to be made, and I need to be directly involved, but really challenge each and every one of them to do their best on behalf of the people. And I think that that's really important. I do appreciate the support and the collaboration with the House, and Speaker Saiki, Chair Luke, and yourself have been very supportive. Yeah, I know it's been a challenge with unemployment insurance and a whole bunch of other things, and I really do appreciate that the House has really committed to putting the community first and really being willing to, talk about the real tough policy issues, but been willing to allow me to make the decisions that I think best serve our community, and then have been able to support those decisions. So, yeah, I just really appreciate everything that Speaker Saiki, Chair Luke, and yourself have done to really serve the community.
Thank you, Governor Ige, for that. I want to, before I leave the notion of your cabinet, because I think being a cabinet member must be so interesting, and you must hear different points of view that are sometimes in conflict, in direct conflict, and one person's pulling you this way and one person's pulling you this way. How do you deal with the different agendas, sometimes the conflicting information? And, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of egos. You must have a lot of egos in your administration, and you just can't, like we have egos in the legislature. How do you deal with all of that conflict?
I do appreciate each and every cabinet members, and yes, they do have egos. But you know, I really stress with everybody that it's really about serving the public and really doing what's in the best interest of the people. I mean, you know, when we look at this pandemic response, and clearly, you know, Bruce Anderson and Sarah Park have been criticized in the public, but they really have been focused on what makes the most sense in protecting the public health. You know, and Claire Connors as Attorney General has really been challenged to answer the legal issues and make sure that we can navigate. Clearly, we're in an emergency situation, so the executive does have more authority to take action. But it's always about trying to balance, you know, the long-term outcome and making sure that we can exit out in a way that serves the community. You know, and then General Hara, you know, as Director of Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, you know, he's really interfacing with the federal government, you know, trying to manage the National Guard and make sure that we can get the resources we need, you know, and really working with everybody involved to come to a decision that we need to support as a community and move forward.
And thank you, Governor, for asking these questions, because I think, you know, the public sees the conflict and we don't understand it, but I think that is very much a part of a good decision-making process, the fact that you're getting informed by lots of different folks. So going to the next question, you know, your leadership style has been attributed to your background as an engineer. My background is as a high school social studies teacher. I love all these conversations about government. On the positive side, your background as an engineer means that you're methodical, you're analytical. On the more critical side, you know, some would suggest that this might lead to analysis paralysis. So what would you say to your detractors about this criticism?
You know, I've heard that a lot, Della, and I challenge people when they bring it up that, you know, I have been criticized as so slow to respond, and, you know, I'm willing to talk about that directly. You know, I really focus on what's in the best interest of the community. And it is about making decisions that you won't have any regrets, you know, going forward. Clearly, at the initial stages of this pandemic, the focus was on the public health, really, and taking the actions that that the experts are suggesting is critical to flatten the curve and really keep our community safe. And that a lot of those decisions early on, you know, I knew that the 14-day mandatory quarantine would wreak havoc in our community. And clearly that was a tough decision to make. You know, from the public health perspective, we knew that that would be the only way to really clamp down on the virus infection here in the state. But also, I knew that that would lead to unemployment numbers that we've never seen before, really in the entire history of the state of Hawaii. And so recognize that there'd be severe economic impact, and knowing that we just needed to do it because otherwise there would be putting lives and our community at risk.
Governor, since you mentioned that 14-day quarantine, you got in a lot of flack from it. I didn't really think of that as the legislature was pushing you to close down. But really, that 14-day quarantine, and for all of the holes that have been poked at the enforcement, that really is the policy. And that I want to give a shout out to you. That was your policy call to impose that 14-day quarantine and then have your AG's office really enforce it. And that's not happening in any other state. I don't think that the public understands that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Della, I am on a call with all the nation's governors and territories. So typically there are 50 governors on the call, and we talk about it all the time. 22 states have ordered mandatory quarantines of, some quarantine those coming from New York, different ways of trying to isolate and stay away from those communities with a lot of virus activity. Hawaii is the only state in the country that the quarantine actually means something. We were serious about enforcing it. We have identified the gaps in the process, and obviously there are, people who just want to circumvent and ignore the law. But the overwhelming majority of people who are ordered to quarantine are fulfilling that requirement. And we've been working with the counties across the state, working with the legislature as we've identified gaps, and really discovering ways to really stop those that are ignoring the law, and really enacting the penalties that are appropriate.
Thank you again, Governor, for doing that. And I know that keeping the 14-day quarantine as we look at the trans-Pacific travel is going to be another topic of conversation. So I'm looking forward to how we kind of talk about that, because I think what you have in place, the screenings that are going to happen, the contact tracing, I think that's also going to be very good policy that we have in place. I want you to brag about one more thing, Governor, because I know you are much, much too humble, and that people don't really acknowledge that the resolve that you have demonstrated in this crisis. So can you share with the public, what you did with Title 32 and the National Guard, and how you stuck to your guns on that, despite what the White House wanted to do, and how that not only has benefited our state, but our nation?
Certainly, and I do co-chair the Council on Governors, which is a bipartisan group of governors, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, appointed by the president to be the interface between governors and states and the federal administration, the president and his administration, and I think most importantly, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, which obviously has big impact here in Hawaii. Department of Homeland Security also houses the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. So clearly, especially during natural disasters, that is just an important part. And in my role as co-chair of the council, we have been working in a very bipartisan way to strengthen National Guard and their support for civil activities, which, as a governor and every single governor all across the country, we recognize how important that is. And most importantly, taking the action to assure that even if the federal government is involved and is paying for some of it, that the governors and the states will always be in control and directing activity of the National Guard and even the military should they get involved. The current recent actions and the protests and rioting and violence is truly a concerning situation, I think, that all of us governors deal with. And to think, President thinking that he can direct action to keep our communities safe all across the country, from New York and what's happening in Queens and in all of those county complexes, to Washington, D.C., to Minnesota, to Seattle, to Portland, and to Honolulu, and even on Maui, is a ridiculous assumption that he can order the military to go in and fix things. The governors made it clear that that's just not acceptable, and most importantly, it really doesn't serve the public in any way. Title 32 allows the federal government to support our National Guard in responding to emergencies, but it is premised on the notion that governors are still in charge. And I think that that's the best compromise and best serves our community. We made it very clear with the president that that is fundamental and that none of us governors would ever give up the authority, regardless of what the federal government can provide if we cannot direct the activities of the National Guard or the Department of Defense as it impacts on an emergency.
I really appreciate you taking that stand, Governor. I want to acknowledge a question that came up in our Facebook live stream. This is from Alan Smithy, who's asking, what is your plan to expedite addressing the remaining issues of unemployment insurance and food security as funds run out?
Certainly on a couple of fronts, I just authorized the distribution to all the other counties. I think it's been covered. City and County of Honolulu got CARES Act funds directly, more than $300 million. None of the other counties, Maui, Kauai, or Hawaii Island, got resources from the CARES Act. So I just signed the transfer, and I know the legislature had included that in their support for supporting the county. So I just signed over 175 million or so to the counties. And really, that is much needed funds that will help us support more food distribution, help support with mental health services to the homeless, and other real critical safety net services that our community needs, especially in light of the fact that we are still having some challenges with distribution of unemployment benefits.
So, Governor, we could probably go on for a lot longer, and this conversation has been super interesting, but I'm going to ask the last question, and please take your time to answer it. Beyond the physical changes that we're going to see and that we can expect in the post-COVID world, things like more social distancing, mask wearing, better hygiene practices, can you share with us how you think Hawaii will be different in the post-COVID world? Paint me a picture of what you believe Hawaii will look like AC after COVID in very specific areas that we might not have heard from you talk about recently.
Thanks very much for that question, Della. I do think that this COVID pandemic is a community-changing event, and clearly Hawaii will not ever be the same going forward. So just on a couple of quick things, and I don't want to get bogged down in all the details, but for the hospitality industry, I'm challenging them to reinvent themselves in this infectious disease environment and really help us educate the travelers and visitors and guests coming here about what it is to be a good, respectful visitor. And that means being sensitive to our culture and helping us celebrate our diversity. But now in this COVID, post-COVID environment, also that they need to help us keep them healthy. So, be connected to us. If they are getting sick, we do want to support them and we want to help them be here as a guest and help us keep our community safe. So it's really creating a broad community network to help every guest and every resident be safe in this infectious disease environment. So, we're working with everyone in the visitor industry to reinvent themselves in that context. A couple other things I think that will really be accelerated and help with the transformation of our economy. Della, I could not imagine us being here and doing this, streaming live on Olelo, having this conversation via video conference. I'm the biggest proponent of technology for all of my 30 years plus in public service, but we've seen more acceleration of the embracing of technology. The notion of meeting face to face but being separated. And I truly see, it's helped us in the departments. Our agencies have embraced telework. We've actually accelerated our drive to paperless. And I know the legislature's been there forever, and you don't know what it was like, Della, before we did everything paperlessly. But I think you will see a tremendous acceleration of the transformation of state government. And it'll allow us to be more responsive and more efficient and effective on behalf of the people of Hawaii. I mean, I think that's a real, live, tangible benefit. And finally, we've talked about creating an economy for our children. I know that for you and for me, parents with kids, we want them to have the opportunity to live in Hawaii and grow up, be able to purchase a house or rent an apartment, get a exciting quality job, and really enjoy all the benefits of being here in the islands. And I think that this COVID is really accelerating that opportunity. My son is a software engineer for Microsoft, and he's been working at home since January 1st of this year. And Microsoft just informed him that he can continue to work at home till the end of October. And obviously, if we knew that at the beginning, we could have told him to come home, and he could have worked from Hawaii just as well as he could work from where he lives in Seattle. And so this COVID is making that opportunity real. And we should be able to do a whole lot more of that going forward. So just thank you so much for this opportunity. I really believe that Hawaii will be stronger and better. Our community will come together in a way that will allow us to create a better Hawaii going forward.
Thank you so much, Governor, for joining us. And I'm very excited about all of those things that you've talked about. You can sign off now, continue watching Speaker Saiki and me talk, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
And as we look to the new normal, to the transformation of state government, as Governor Ige has talked about, innovating digital spaces is exactly what the next agency in our community segment has done. I want to show you and share with you a story about what the state library system is doing to respond to the impacts of COVID-19. Take it away, Alelo.
I'm Stacy Aldridge, and I'm the State Librarian of the Hawaii State Public Library System. The first thing we did was look at the health and safety, and that's when we started making decisions to close. We looked at it as, let's take things one step at a time, and let's do what we can do at the moment. We had staff who started working behind the scenes to create more programming. So we were looking at how do we innovate right now, because now everything has to be virtual. Everybody's stuck at home. They're not going to have the same access they would have to our spaces to get books or DVDs. What are the services that we can offer? So we started looking for things that would help the community and would help people feel like they were engaged and still had access. So the first thing is we started offering streaming video, and that was wildly popular. We had over 100,000 people who actually individual people viewing movies, and it was 47,000 movies that were watched just within a month period. So that's a lot, and there are great courses as well, so 9,600 courses were taken. We realized that a lot of people didn't have library cards, and so we made sure we got an online library card application so that they could start to access all of our digital resources. So that's been amazingly popular too. I think since we started just a couple weeks ago, we have 2,500 new library cards. And we also started to really look at all the digital content that we had and decided that we needed to add more ebooks and audiobooks. So we pushed a lot of our resources into buying more so people had more access, and especially the popular titles, we added more titles so people didn't have to wait as long. So we started looking at our virtual collections, and then we started thinking about, well, what else can we do? And we were watching what other libraries are doing across the country, and our staff started to do virtual programs. So we have librarians who have videotaped themselves reading stories and singing songs, and so there are virtual story times that kids and parents can watch. And then also we've done there's creative stuff, so how to make something. So we've been using it as a time to experiment with different platforms and different ways of providing service. For us, as I look at what is the new normal, I think the new normal is finding that balance between virtual and physical all the time, and being able to switch one off sometimes and have all the resources and go the other direction. So this has really stretched our resources in thinking about how fast can we do that, and what are the protocols we need to build in order to make that happen. People just want to come back. They miss the place that is, so for some people, it's a quiet place to reflect and to read. For many, it's just part of their ritual. They read the newspaper every day, and we haven't been there, so their ritual has been completely changed. And for others, it's really just access to the world because they don't have internet connectivity. So I think people are going to be really happy to be coming back, and I'm just so happy. I want people to come back, but we want to do it in a way that is healthy and safe for everyone.
Welcome back to Talk Story with House Majority, and thank you for rejoining us. To keep in line with the theme of leadership and adapting to the new normals in this post-COVID world, I'm really happy to have joining us Representative Scott Saiki, Speaker of the House. Welcome, Speaker.
Hey, thanks, Della, for having me today.
So I'm going to do a little bit of context because I really want to let folks into kind of the behind the scenes happenings at the beginning of this year. It's really hard to believe that over the last 5 months, we have seen countries completely shut down, economies come to almost complete standstills, and record number of global unemployment. No one, absolutely no one in January or February of this year was anticipating any of these events. Here in the State House, I can remember the very day we were learning about the U.S. orders banning travelers from China that was issued with almost no warning from the White House. We knew that there were actually planes in the air carrying passengers from China, and we had airport and health staff running around scrambling and asking, what are we going to do with these patients or these passengers when they came off the airplanes? We had chairs in the House, Speaker and I will know this, who wanted to take action. And I want to do a special shout out to our health chair, John Mizuno, who we worked with to have the very first legislative informational briefing on COVID-19 on February 3rd. I can remember the day that we were in Speaker's office, we're scrambling with the notice of hearing. And I can remember that the three of us, were working with health officials to put this informational briefing together. For me, after that event, there was a lot of things happening in the House. And, Speaker, this is to your credit and what was happening kind of behind the scenes when we were dealing with this crisis beginning in early February. It's indicative of the kind of thoughtful, behind the scenes nature of your style of leadership. So can you take me through some of the things that you did as Speaker of the House early on in February and March that people don't know about, that what we were doing in the House to set the stage for a shutdown and hopefully a recovery?
Yeah, so this was, as everybody knows, this is just was an unprecedented time for all of us. And I just kind of recall in February, our session had convened on January 15, and in February, we were about a quarter way through the regular session when there was just more and more media reports about the pandemic. And I think what we all went through at that time was that we would see every day in the media how the cases were increasing from the west, geographically from the East Coast, working its way westward, and then eventually to Hawaii. And then cases started to spike in Hawaii, probably the latter part of February or middle part of March. And as I said, this was unprecedented. The House members, should take a lot of credit for the tone that we took. And Della, you're part of the House leadership team as well. I think that we all made sure that we weren't, number one, would not panic, and number two, that we would think through what needed to be done as we prepared for the eventual increase of the caseload in Hawaii. So one of the things that the House did early on was to draft, and this was to the credit of Representative Ty Cullen, who chairs the House Legislative Management Committee, which is responsible for managing legislative and administrative matters within the House of Representatives. And Representative Cullen worked along with us to develop protocols that would guide us in the event that we began to see cases at the state capitol. And there were 3 different levels within our protocols, and we actually had to turn to our protocols when a state senator was diagnosed as being positive, and that was in mid-March. We turned to our protocols, and the protocols told us that we needed to shut down the House offices at that point, which we did immediately upon learning of the diagnosis. So the House, and the House protocols were the first to be drafted. And I believe that other state agencies basically copied the protocols that we did.
So we had procedures in place. We saw this coming. You also took another really important step that I think has really set us up after we shut down. Can you talk a little bit about the drafting and the creation of the House COVID-19 committee?
Yeah, so on the day that we recessed our regular session, which was March 16th, we introduced a resolution to create the House Select Committee on COVID-19 Economic and Financial Preparedness. And the resolution passed unanimously in the House. The purpose of this committee was to basically bring together not just House members, but also members of the private and nonprofit sectors to basically prepare our state for what we knew would be a very significant financial hit on our state government and our state economy. And, at the outset, what we stated was that we wanted to be in a position where we would prevent state government shutdowns from occurring. There are a bunch of us in the House who were around 10 years ago when we had to institute furlough Fridays as a result of the banking of the Great Recession. And we did not want that to happen again during this pandemic. So that was one of the reasons we created this committee. But the committee has done a really good job. We have about 35 members on the committee. Only 5 of them are House members. The rest are from private sector, the nonprofit sector, the community sector. In fact, we're going to be adding on a couple of two members who are from the Aina Aloha group. It's a group that just recently started to begin the discussion on a statewide basis for how we can incorporate Hawaiian values into the rebuilding of the economy. So this committee has done a really good job. In fact, one of the first tasks that we took on was to develop a public health matrix, a public health risk level matrix. And this matrix was unveiled a couple of weeks ago. We did work with private and nonprofit sector individuals on this, and the matrix basically tells us in color coding, red, orange, yellow, and green, tells us what risk level we're at and what kinds of activities are allowed under each of those risk levels. So we're currently at risk level yellow, and hopefully we'll be at green in a couple of weeks.
So, some people during this time are critical. We don't have access to our leaders. There's no way for us to get our ideas in. But the subcommittee or the COVID-19 committee is now moving into a phase of subcommittees. Can you speak a little bit about what that phase is going to look like and how that might actually engage more people? Because I'm appreciative of the fact that you're going to add Aloha Aina folks to the regular committee. But talk about a little bit so that the public knows what are these subcommittees going to be doing?
Okay, so in order to kind of help facilitate the work of the committee, because what became clear to us was that there were more and more people on the committee and with specific ideas. So we began to create a subcommittee. The first one was actually the public health matrix subcommittee. The second one that we created a couple of weeks ago was the tourism subcommittee. And what you saw a few days ago was an announcement by the governor, lieutenant governor, the Senate president, that they were planning travel. The third subcommittee that
Speaker, can I ask you to pause just a minute? I think we might be having technical difficulties. Can you check can you say again what you said from that second point? Sorry about that. And maybe your speaker.
The third subcommittee is the Housing and Homelessness Subcommittee, and that is chaired by James Koshiba, who is a housing and homeless community advocate. The purpose of this committee is to explore ways that we can address what we know will be a very significant need for support, especially among renters in Hawaii.
So I'm looking forward to this because I think those subcommittees are really reflective of the way that the committee in general is looking at these big issues. I'd like to shift gears a little bit, Speaker. You have always been a vocal proponent of state legislatures exerting their power within our system of government as the driver of public policy and the appropriate branch of government that wields the power of the purse in the interest of the taxpayer. So during this crisis, we have seen you continue to be committed to this fundamental aspect of our constitutional form of government. Can you comment on why it is so important for you to assert the power of the legislature, of the legislative branch?
So, as you know, we have three branches of government: the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. And I have always believed that the legislature is actually the most powerful branch of government, even though we do have a cool ecosystem of government. And the reason why the legislature is the most powerful is actually there's a couple of reasons. One is that the legislature, because we have 76 members, 25 in the Senate, 51 in the House, we are closest to the people. We have a pulse of what people statewide are thinking and feeling and doing. So we are closest to the public, and we have a pulse of what the public is thinking. The second reason is that under the Constitution, the legislature is the body that sets public policy in our state. And we do this through our constitutional authority to appropriate funds, to enact laws, and to provide oversight over the other two branches of government. So the legislature is the most powerful branch in government, and I've always felt that the members needed to know that they need to assert their authority and fulfill these responsibilities.
And I appreciate that because the public policy making really is in the hands of the people who are elected by the people. I want to kind of turn and pivot a little bit, and I want you to kind of talk about yourself, Speaker, since you are so shy to talk about yourself. So compared to the quintessential archetype of a boisterous, brash politician, your style tends to be more quiet and reserved. But as your colleague, I know that you are a tough fighter, you're a reformer, and someone who is committed to social justice and finding solutions to complex problems. So can you explain to your viewers, probably a lot of representatives who are watching this, where your passion for reform comes from and what will ultimately push you to break from your more reserved style to actually take a stand and make a statement? What's the things that drive you, Speaker Saiki?
Well, I just don't believe in the status quo, and I feel that there's always room for improvement. I think a progressive society is one that is willing to kind of self-reflect and make adjustments so that you're always trying to improve things. The status quo does not help us at all. And, what we're learning through this pandemic is what needs to change in government, what needs to change in our state. We should really take a hard look at those lessons and see what we can change going forward.
I think that self-reflection that you're talking about is actually going to result in a lot of change. And we still have so many difficult conversations ahead of us, but I think that attitude is really something that I think all of the members kind of embrace, that we're not just simply about the status quo. Last question, and I don't see anything in our Facebook questions. There is a question I want to acknowledge from Irina about when will the 14-day quarantine be lifted for mainland flights. That's going to be something that the governor and his team will answer, but that it will come at some point. I really believe that will come at some point. For you, Scott, Speaker, just as I asked the governor before, how will Hawaii be different in the post-COVID world from your point of view? And how is it going to be different in like the big ways, the ways that are going to matter to the people who are watching this program and who want us to do more and go beyond the status quo? What do you see the post-COVID world going to look like here in Hawaii?
So I think people will be more open to change. I think that Hawaii will be more resilient. I think that Hawaii will be more focused on cultural values here, including environmental values. I think what has happened over the past couple of months is that people have learned to live a little bit smaller. And I think that that will persist to an extent after the pandemic is over, after a vaccine is found. There will be, I believe there will be a greater emphasis on providing for the safety net in Hawaii. And also just the ability and the realization that we're all in this together and we have to just coexist.
Thank you. And I think those are really kind of going to be important words as we move forward. Thank you, Speaker Saiki, for joining me. I'm going to keep asking you these tough questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
To Governor Ige, also, who joined me for this episode of Talk Story with House Majority. As I always end, it's more important than ever that we stay connected and informed during these uncertain times. If you're new to the show, please follow the House Majority on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at High House Dems for most recent updates and future episodes. Until next week, when I think we're going to be putting together a great show, we'll see you next week. Aloha.